we look at users, roles and privileges again. Let's follow up on the previous role and privileges that were granted to Hemant. Log in as Hemant and see what he has. Okay, so he has been granted the junior DBA role. He does not have admin option, means he cannot re-grant it to somebody else. This is a default role which is enabled for him whenever he logs in, and it's not granted via the OS. Let's create another role. Okay, so a role belongs to a database. Remember, it does not belong to a specific schema. Now this role will be granted some table level privileges, object level privileges. So those privileges are going to come from the HR schema. Remember, when you issue a grant statement like this, the grant to can name a user or can name a role. Oracle does not differentiate in the syntax whether you are granting to a user or to a role. So here HR manager is not a user, but it's a role which pre-exists in the database. Can HR grant a role to Hemant? The role belongs to the database, it does not belong to the schema. So HR would not be able to grant the role to the user. Only the database administrator can do that. Now if Hemant connects and views the roles that he has been granted, we can see that both roles, the junior DBA role and HR manager, are both enabled by default. We have not created a role which is accessed via password. These roles are enabled by default because there is no password required to authenticate them. Let's see what privileges are granted to the roles. When I'm querying DBA tab privileges, I'm only looking for object level privileges. The privileges could be on a table or on a view or on a stored procedure or package. The view name for those privileges is still called DBA tab privs. So here we can see HR manager has been granted privilege on the departments table in the HR schema, and only privilege is select. But the employees table he has delete, insert, select and update. And you can see that the only grantee that appears here is HR manager. Hemant does not appear as a grantee because he has not been explicitly granted privileges on these tables, departments and employees. The privileges were granted to HR manager, but by virtue of the role that has been granted to him, here the HR manager role was granted to him, he can view the data. Since the employees table does not belong in his schema, he has to prefix the employees table with the owner, that is HR. So this is the prefix is the schema that has this table employees. Can you query any other table? No, he can't, because the privilege he has been granted is via the role HR manager, and the HR manager role has no privileges on the locations table. Let's go back and look at the system privileges again. Connect a system again. Again, the grantee can be a user or a role. So when you are querying any of these data dictionary views for grantees, it doesn't matter whether you are querying for a user or a role, they both appear to be the same. So here we can see HR had been granted create session, create table space, create user. This we had seen in the last lesson. And junior DB has been granted these two privileges. So these two privileges are also available to Hemant by virtue of the role junior DBA being granted to Hemant. Can I grant one role to another role? Yes, I can. I can actually grant a role to a role. So I can build up a family of roles if necessary. Of course, more than 2 levels of roles will make things more complicated and difficult to interpret. But I could encompass one role into another role, put a group of 5 or 6 roles into one superseding role. So you could have a super DBA and then sub-levels of DBAs or sub-levels of managers, each with different sets of privileges with their own defined roles, but the superior DBA having all the roles which are granted to every user.